Well, just days after announcing her plans to form an exploratory committee for a possible presidential run, Senator Elizabeth Warren will head to Iowa. The Massachusetts senator will hold events across the state this weekend, according to her Facebook page. Iowa holds the first in the national presidential nominating contest, First in the Nation, set for February 3rd, 2020. According to the latest polling in the state, 65% of likely Democratic caucus goers view Warren favorably. 20% view her unfavorably, and 16% are unsure. Meanwhile, President Trump weighed in on Senator Warren's potential 2020 run.
Well, I'm happy about it. I think she'll be wonderful. I hope she maybe gets the nomination. That would be a wonderful thing for me.
She says she's in the fight all the way, Mr. President. Do you really think she believes she can win?
Well, that I don't know. You'd have to ask her psychiatrist.
The New York Times reports that Senator Warren's early entry to the race suggests she wants to erase any uncertainty among supporters whom she kept waiting and ultimately disappointed by not running for president in 2016. The Times writes that the race is currently defined by uncertainty over who is actually running and which Democrat matches the moment. There are more than 30 contenders deciding on whether they will seek the nomination, including former Vice President Joe Biden, and as many as 8 senators. And if Beto O'Rourke of Texas runs, he would be attempting to become the first ex-congressman to lose a Senate race and go on to be elected president since Abraham Lincoln. O'Rourke's social media account created buzz about his national ambitions over the holiday by posting videos in opposition to President Trump's border wall, and they did seem like campaign videos on many levels. But Mike Barnicle, Elizabeth Warren, does she match the moment?
Well, we're going to find out. We're going to find out, Mika. She certainly has name recognition, and that poll you just read alluded to 65% of the Iowa caucus goers approve of her or like her or whatever the question, however it was phrased. So she's got a big head start out there, a big jump on a rather anonymous field, with the exception of Vice President Biden and a couple of others. And Eddie, I don't know about you, but I'm just going to sit back here and watch until I see the full team put together on the field before I start figuring out, well, who looks good and who doesn't.
And given the way you talk about baseball, Mike, I might follow your lead in this regard. I mean, it seems to me that the internal divide within the Democratic Party will play itself out in 2020.
What do you think the divide is?
I think it has everything to do with progressives who are trying to push the party more to the left. And in some ways, the holdover of the Clintonites and the Obama folk, right? Will they continue to hold the reins of the party? And I think oftentimes we want to read this in a narrow ideological way. I think it has something to do with the way the look of that freshman class of representatives coming to D.C. Tomorrow who will be officially representatives. Yeah. They are pushing the party to be more aggressive, to be more attuned to working people, to resist corporate money. And if you have Democrats that look familiar, the Democrats of 2008, the Democrats of 2012, if they look, I don't think they're going to excite them. So there's going to be this interesting kind of tension.
Let me talk about the positives, Mike, and you tell me if you disagree. You know Elizabeth Warren quite well, as do I, and I'm a huge supporter. And here are the reasons why I think she's a huge positive. I think she's kind of a political athlete. She's a great communicator. She really puts herself out there. She takes chances. She really emphasizes her own story and how it matches the American story. Her life's work has talked about how she's addressed some of the issues that have affected Americans, from bankruptcy to debt to being left out. Her story matches that story. Her parents' story matches that story. What she studied when she went to Harvard matches that story. She was obsessed with bankruptcy. She sat, I think it was for her thesis, in bankruptcy court for months and watched the American people walking in and out of the door, and they were just like her. They weren't someone else. And she's got that story baked into her political rise. It's what she's all about. She, under President Barack Barack Obama created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. She created an entity that tries to address what is plaguing the American story right now. And then she was booted out by Republicans, and he couldn't bring her on. He didn't have the guts, I guess, to bring her on and have her lead it because the Republicans didn't want her. So you know what she did? She ran for Senate, and she's back in Washington making a difference again. I know there's a lot of reasons why she might be too far left or this or that, but I just wonder if her story and her sort of guts and determination do match the moment.
Well, I think her story and her record match part of the moment, Mika. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think the trick for Elizabeth Warren is going to be the trick for all of the Democratic candidates who run for president in a Democratic primary. It's the past versus the future. Everybody who votes in a Democratic primary knows who Donald Trump is. They know how they feel about him. So the trick for Elizabeth Warren and all of the other candidates to come is going to be to put the past in the past and talk about the future. Talk about your children's education, your family's health care, your pay raise that you really haven't gotten in the last 12 years, things like that. And the other aspect of it is going to be even more tricky, and it's going to be this. How do you figure out? Elizabeth Warren is very familiar with a lot of people because of her record, as you indicated. And she keeps saying she's going to fight like hell. She's going to fight for you. She's going to fight for this, fight for that. A large part of the electorate is tired of the fighting. They just want to come together. They want to calm things down and get the job done. So we'll see. Jim Vanderhyde, I don't know whether you agree with that or not, but what's your view?
I think what Eddie said earlier, I couldn't agree more with. Both parties are sort of facing this. You don't really know what either party stands for right now, especially if you take Trump out of the equation on the Republican side. And for Democrats, that field is going to be more wide open than we've ever seen. And I think the idea field is more wide open than we've ever seen. If you think about immigration, if you think about Medicare for all, if you think about clamping down on the power of corporations, it's not clear to me yet exactly where the mainstream of the Democratic Party is. It seems like all the energy is with the far left, is with the progressive movement, but I don't think we know until there's a leader. And if Biden doesn't get into the race, and it's probably a 50-50 chance he jumps in, there's nobody in this field that looks like they would be seen as a formidable front runner for some time, particularly once we get to April and there's 25 Democrats running and basically every constituency has their favorite inside the party. And so I think it'll be fascinating. I think it'll be long, and I think it'll be telling in terms of what does the modern Democratic Party look like.
Right. And I still think, Jim, we're in the midst of a change election. I still think that the electorate, particularly in the Democratic Party, wants to see something different, something about the future, folks talking directly. But what's interesting about Elizabeth Warren, I'm also interested in the way in which she gets characterized. The Political headline recently had her tied to the way in which people talked about Hillary Clinton. We already see in interesting sorts of ways the gendered nature of our politics and the way, in some ways, Elizabeth Warren is being boxed in by the very bad coverage of Hillary Clinton. I hope she can be able to break through that, and I hope we can break through that.
Well, we'll see. It's starting to get, I think, very interesting. Still ahead, it sure seems like a pretty big question right now. Why did the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court personally intervene in the Mueller probe? We're going to dig into John Roberts' highly unusual move just ahead on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.